Maya Chun stepped in front of a loaded gun to save a man who didn't know her name. The billionaire who watched her fearless eyes that night would lose his empire trying to understand why. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you do when fear has you by the throat and you choose to act anyway. For Maya Chun, a 23-year-old waitress working the dinner shift at the Belmont Grand, that moment of defining courage came on an ordinary Thursday evening when nothing about the night suggested it would become the fulcrum upon which her entire life would pivot. For Harrison Blackwell, a man whose wealth had insulated him from every hardship ordinary people faced, it was the night he learned that true valor doesn't come with a price tag, and that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who teach us what it means to be truly alive. The Belmont Grand wasn't just a restaurant, it was an institution, a cathedral of culinary excellence, where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen. Crystal chandeliers cast warm pools of golden light across tables draped in pristine white linen. The soft murmur of conversation mingled with the delicate clink of silverware on bone china, creating a symphony of refined civility. The walls were paneled in dark mahogany, and oil paintings of pastoral scenes hung in gilded frames, giving the space an air of old-world elegance. This was a place where power brokers closed deals over 30-year-old Scott, where celebrities hid behind menus, and where a single dinner could cost more than most people made in a week. Maya had been working at the Belmont Grand for 8 months, and she still felt like an imposter every time she pushed through the heavy kitchen doors into the dining room. She had grown up in the Riverside district, where the buildings sagged with age and hope was a luxury most families couldn't afford. Her mother had raised her and her younger brother alone after their father disappeared when Maya was 12, working 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Maya had learned early that life didn't hand you anything. You had to fight for every inch of ground you gained. She had started at the Belmont Grand out of desperation. Her mother's diabetes had worsened and the medical bills were piling up faster than she could pay them. The restaurant paid better than anywhere else she'd applied, and the tips from the wealthy clientele could be substantial if you played your cards right, smiled at the right moments, and made yourself invisible when they wanted to pretend you didn't exist. It was a delicate dance of servitude and survival, and Maya had learned the steps well. On this particular Thursday, the restaurant was operating at full capacity. Every table was occupied, and the kitchen was a controlled chaos of shouted orders and sizzling pans. Maya had been assigned to the East Wing, a section that included some of the most exclusive tables in the house. Among her customers that evening was Harrison Blackwell, though she didn't know his name. He was just another face in a sea of expensive suits, another man who barely acknowledged her existence as he ordered the house special and a bottle of wine that cost more than her monthly rent. Harrison Blackwell was 62 years old and worth more than most small countries. He had built his fortune in commercial real estate, transforming skylines and displacing communities in the name of progress and profit. He was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, when he wanted it, and he had long ago stopped seeing the people who served him as fully human. They were functions, extensions of the service he paid for, as interchangeable as the forks and knives that appeared and disappeared from his table. He sat alone that evening, as he often did, preferring his own company to the sycophants and social climbers who usually surrounded him. He was reading through a contract on his tablet, barely tasting the exquisite meal before him, his mind already 3 steps ahead to the next acquisition, the next victory. Maya had just finished serving the appetizers to table 12 when she noticed him. There was something wrong in the way he moved, something that set off alarm bells in the primitive part of her brain that had been honed by years of vigilance in unsafe neighborhoods. He had entered through the main doors, and at first glance he might have been mistaken for a late diner, though his clothing was all wrong. He wore a dark hoodie pulled low over his face and jeans that had seen better days. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets and his shoulders were hunched in a way that spoke of coiled tension, of a spring wound too tight. The mater d' had approached him, and Maya watched from across the room as the conversation unfolded. She saw the mater d's expression change from professional courtesy to confusion, then to fear. It happened in the space of 3 heartbeats. The man in the hoodie pulled his right hand from his pocket, and even from 20 feet away, Maya could see the dull black gleam of the gun. The dining room didn't erupt in chaos immediately. There was a moment of collective disbelief, a suspended second where the elegant patrons of the Belmont Grand simply couldn't process what they were seeing. This wasn't supposed to happen here. Violence was something that happened in other places, to other people, in neighborhoods they drove past without looking. The cognitive dissonance was almost comical. And then someone screamed. The sound shattered the illusion of safety like a brick through stained glass. Suddenly, the dining room was alive with terror. People dove under tables. Chairs toppled backward as patrons scrambled for the exits. A woman near the window began sobbing, her carefully applied makeup running in dark rivulets down her cheeks. The gunman raised his weapon higher, and his voice cut through the pandemonium with desperate fury. "Everybody stay where you are," he shouted. "Nobody moves. Nobody calls the cops, or I swear I'll start shooting." Maya's first instinct was the same as everyone else's. Run, hide, survive. Her muscles tensed to bolt for the kitchen, for the back exit she knew was there for anywhere that wasn't in the line of fire. But then she saw the gunman's face, really saw it, and something inside her shifted. He was young, terribly young, probably not much older than her brother Marcus. Beneath the bravado in the weapon, she could see the fear in his eyes, the way his hand trembled, the sheen of sweat on his forehead. This wasn't a hardened criminal. This was someone who had been backed into a corner, someone who had run out of options and was making a terrible, desperate choice. She knew that look. She had seen it in her own mirror on the nights when the bills exceeded her bank account and the walls seemed to close in. She had seen it in her mother's eyes when the pharmacy told her they couldn't fill her insulin prescription without payment up front. The gunman was moving through the dining room now, waving his weapon, ordering people to throw their wallets and jewelry onto the tables. Most complied with shaking hands, too terrified to do anything else. Harrison Blackwell remained in his seat, frozen not by fear but by a sort of detached fascination. He watched the scene unfold as if it were a play, something happening on a screen rather than 6 feet from where he sat. His decades of privilege had left him unable to process the reality that he was in actual danger. The gunman approached Blackwell's table, and Maya felt her heart seize in her chest. She could see how this was going to unfold. Blackwell would say something dismissive or challenging, his ego unable to comprehend submission even with a gun pointed at his face. The young man would panic, the gun would go off, and someone would die in this temple of wealth and indifference. Maya didn't make a conscious decision to move. Her body acted on instinct, on something deeper than thought. She stepped forward, placing herself directly between the gunman and Harrison Blackwell. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't plead or scream. She simply stood there, her dark eyes meeting the gunman's terrified gaze with a calm that surprised even her. "Please," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the jackhammer of her heart. "You don't want to do this." The gunman's weapon was now pointed directly at her chest. She could see her own reflection in his wide, dilated pupils. She could smell his fear, acrid and sharp. Behind her, she heard Blackwell make a small sound of surprise, as if he'd only just realized she existed at all. The young man's hand shook harder, and for a terrible moment Maya thought she had miscalculated, that her gamble would cost her everything. But then she saw something flicker in his expression. Recognition, perhaps. Or kinship. One desperate person seeing another. "What do you know about what I want?" The gunman's voice cracked, revealing the boy beneath the bravado. "You don't know anything about me." "You're right," Maya said, taking the smallest step forward. "I don't know your story, but I know you're scared. I know you think this is the only way, and I'm telling you it's not. Whatever you're going through, whatever brought you here tonight, there's another way. There has to be." The dining room had gone silent. Everyone was holding their breath, watching this impossible moment unfold. A waitress and a gunman, separated by 3 feet in an ocean of desperation, connected by the invisible thread of shared struggle. The gunman's name was Tyler Morrison, though Maya wouldn't learn that until much later. In this frozen moment, he was simply a terrified young man whose finger rested too heavily on a trigger that separated this night from tragedy by the thickness of a breath. His eyes darted between Maya's face and the dining room behind her, calculating odds that didn't exist, looking for an escape route from a situation that had already spiraled beyond his control. Maya could see him processing her words. See the war being waged behind his eyes between the desperation that had brought him here and the fundamental decency that hadn't yet been completely extinguished. "You don't understand," Tyler said, and his voice broke on the last word. "You can't understand. They took everything. My mom, she's sick. The hospital, they just cut her off. No insurance, no money. No more treatment. They just let her go home to die." He was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "What was I supposed to do? Just watch her fade away? Just sit there and do nothing while she suffocates in her own bed because I can't afford the oxygen tanks she needs?" The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She understood. God help her, she understood exactly what he was feeling because she had stood at that same precipice. She knew the soul-crushing helplessness of watching someone you love suffer while the machinery of modern medicine ground on, indifferent to anything but payment. The only difference between her and this young man was that she had found a legal avenue to survive, however precarious. He had run out of option, or at least believed he had, which amounted to the same thing in the end. Behind her, Harrison Blackwell was experiencing something he hadn't felt in decades. His carefully constructed worldview, the one where hard work equaled success and failure was always the result of personal inadequacy, was developing cracks. He had heard the young man's confession, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he saw beyond the surface of someone's actions to the desperation beneath. The girl, this waitress whose name he didn't even know, had put herself in harm's way not for glory or reward, but because she recognized something in this criminal that Blackwell had been blind to. She saw a human being in crisis. "How much does she need?" Maya asked, her voice still calm, still steady. "For the oxygen, for the treatment." "How much?" Tyler laughed. A bitter, broken sound. "Thousands. Tens of thousands. I'm 19 years old. I work at a gas station making minimum wage. I might as well need $1 million. The gun wavered in his hand. This was supposed to be easy. Come in, scare some rich people, take their money, and get out. Nobody was supposed to fight back. Nobody was supposed to care. 'Cause we don't care, do we? The voice came from behind Maya, and she turned her head slightly to see Harrison Blackwell standing up from his table. He moved slowly, his hands visible, approaching with the caution of someone who had finally grasped the gravity of the situation. "We sit in our comfortable restaurants, eating our expensive meals, and we never think about the people who serve us or the people who are suffering just outside our line of sight. We've made an art form of not caring." Tyler's gun swung toward Blackwell and Maya's hand shot out instinctively. not to grab the weapon but to gently touch Tyler's arm. It was a gesture of connection, of human contact, and it arrested his motion. "Look at him," Maya said softly. "Really look at him. He's not your enemy. None of these people are your enemy. The system that created this situation, that's the enemy. But hurting people here tonight won't fix anything. It'll just add to the suffering. It'll just create more victims." Blackwell reached into his jacket pocket and Tyler's entire body tensed. "I'm just getting my wallet," Blackwell said, his voice measured and clear. He extracted a fine leather billfold and opened it, pulling out several credit cards and a thick stack of cash. "How much did you think you'd get tonight? 2,000? 5,000? Here, take it. Take all of it. And give me your mother's name and the name of the hospital. I'll make sure she gets her treatment." It was a moment of pure surreal absurdity. A billionaire negotiating with a would-be robber in the middle of a held-up restaurant while a waitress stood between them like some kind of unlikely mediator. Tyler stared at the money in Blackwell's outstretched hand as if it were a snake that might bite him. "This is a trick," he said. "You're trying to trick me." "No trick," Blackwell said. "I'm trying to prevent a tragedy. You're trying to save your mother. I respect that even if I can't condone your methods. But I have the means to help, and standing here pointing a gun at people isn't going to end well for anyone. Least of all your mother. If you get arrested or worse, who takes care of her then?" The logic was irrefutable, and Tyler's resolve was crumbling. The gun lowered slowly, incrementally, as if his arm had simply run out of strength to hold it up. Maya could feel the shift in the room, the collective breath being released as the immediate danger receded. She gently reached out and placed her hand over Tyler's, the one holding the weapon, and applied the softest pressure downward. "It's over," she whispered. "You did your best. You fought for her. Now let us help you fight the right way." The gun clattered to the floor. Tyler's knees buckled and Maya caught him. This boy man who had been so consumed by desperation that he'd become someone he wasn't. He sobbed into her shoulder while around them the wealthy patrons of the Belmont Grand watched in stunned silence. Several people had their phones out, capturing video that would be viral within the hour, but in that moment Maya didn't care about any of that. She held Tyler up while Harrison Blackwell picked up the gun with a napkin, carefully setting it aside. The police arrived 7 minutes later, summoned by silent alarms and frantic calls from patrons who had managed to reach their phone. They entered with weapons drawn, shouting commands, and the scene they found was nothing like what they'd expected. They found a young man sitting on the floor, handcuffed with zip ties by the restaurant's head of security, crying quietly while a waitress sat beside him speaking in low, soothing tones. They found Harrison Blackwell giving a statement to the manager, insisting that while charges would have to be filed, he wanted to be clear that the young man had been in crisis and had harmed no one. They found a dining room full of witnesses who would later give conflicting accounts of what had transpired, but who all agreed on one central fact: the waitress had saved them all. As the police led Tyler away, he looked back at Maya with red-rimmed eyes. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing me, for not looking away." Maya nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She watched him disappear through the restaurant doors, knowing his life was about to get exponentially harder before it got better, but also knowing that sometimes being seen, being recognized as human in your darkest moment, was the difference between despair and hope. The manager of the Belmont Grand, a fastidious man named Philippe Marchand, approached Maya with the kind of expression people wear when they don't know whether to fire someone or give them a raise. "Miss Chun," he began, his French accent thickening with stress, "what you did tonight was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish. You could have been killed." Maya looked at him with exhausted eyes. "But I wasn't," she said simply, "and neither was anyone else." Harrison Blackwell inserted himself into the conversation with the casual authority of a man accustomed to controlling rooms. "What she did," he said firmly, "was heroic. She saw a human being in crisis where the rest of us saw only a threat. She responded with compassion and courage, and I'll be writing to the mayor's office recommending her for a civilian commendation." Philippa's expression shifted immediately, reading the power dynamics with practiced precision. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell, we're all very proud of Miss Chun. She's an exemplary employee." Blackwell turned to Maya, and for the first time she saw him not as a customer or a wealthy patron, but as a man who had been fundamentally shaken by what he'd witnessed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya Chun," she replied. "Well, Maya Chun, I would very much like to speak with you when you're done with the police. There's something I want to discuss. It's important." Maya was questioned for over an hour by detectives who seemed simultaneously impressed by her actions and frustrated that she couldn't provide a clearer tactical explanation for why she'd done what she'd done. "How did you know he wouldn't shoot you?" one detective asked. "I didn't know," Maya admitted. "I just knew that if I didn't try, someone was going to die." The detectives exchanged glances and made notes, and finally released her with the standard warnings about potential future testimony. It was nearly midnight when Maya finally emerged from the back office where she'd given her statement. The Belmont Grand had been cleared and closed for the evening, crime scene tape cordoning off sections of the dining room while forensics teams documented evidence. The beautiful space that had been alive with elegant conversation just hours ago now felt like a mausoleum, empty and echoing. Maya's feet ached, her uniform was rumpled, and she felt hollowed out, as if the adrenaline that had sustained her through the crisis had burned through everything else on its way out of her system. Harrison Blackwell was waiting for her in the lobby, sitting in one of the plush leather chairs near the entrance. He'd removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie, looking more human than he had earlier. When he saw her, he stood immediately, and Maya noticed something different in his bearing. Casual arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Miss Chun," he said as she approached, "thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I know you must be exhausted." Maya nodded, too tired to correct him that she hadn't actually agreed to anything. She'd simply been told he was waiting. "What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwell?" she asked, defaulting to the professional deference that had been drilled into her during her training. Even after everything that had happened, the old patterns were hard to break. She was still the waitress, and he was still the wealthy customer. "First," Blackwell said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a business card, "I want you to have this. It's my private number. I've also written my personal assistant's contact information on the back. If you need anything, legal representation, counseling, anything at all in the aftermath of tonight, I want you to call. I'll make sure you're taken care of." Maya took the card, examining it in the dim lobby lighting. It was heavy stock, embossed with elegant lettering that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. "Harrison Blackwell, Chief Executive Officer, Blackwell Properties International." The title alone was intimidating. "That's very generous," Maya said carefully, "but I'll be fine. I didn't do anything that requires compensation. I just did what anyone would do." "That's where you're wrong," Blackwell said, his voice taking on an intensity that made her look up. "What you did tonight was extraordinary. Not anyone would do it. In fact, I'd venture to say that 99% of people would have done exactly what I did, which was freeze like a statue while someone else risked everything. You saw past the threat to the human being underneath. You had empathy in a moment when everyone else, myself included, had only fear." Maya didn't know what to say to that. She'd never been good at accepting praise, and coming from a man like Harrison Blackwell, it felt surreal. "I saw someone who reminded me of my brother," she said finally. "Someone who was scared and desperate and had run out of options. I've been close to that edge myself. Maybe that's why I could see it." Blackwell studied her face for a long moment, and Maya had the unsettling feeling that he was truly seeing her for the first time. Not as a function or a service provider, but as a person with her own history, her own struggles, her own depth. "How old are you?" he asked. 23, Maya replied. "And you've been close to the edge? What brought you there?" It was a personal question, and Maya's first instinct was to deflect, to give him the sanitized version of her life that she gave to curious customers who occasionally asked about her story. But something about this night, about the rawness of everything that had transpired, made the usual deflections feel hollow. "My mother has diabetes," she said. "Type 1. The medical bills are crushing. I work here because it pays better than anywhere else I could find, and I'm still barely keeping up. I understand what it's like to watch someone you love suffer because you don't have enough money to make it stop. I understand desperation." Blackwell's expression shifted, something that might have been shame flickering across his features. "How much?" he asked. "How much do you need?" Maya felt a flare of defensive pride. "I'm not asking for your charity, Mr. Blackwell. We're managing." Blackwell raised a hand. "I'm not offering charity, I'm offering an opportunity. What happened tonight has given me perspective I didn't have before. I've spent my entire adult life building an empire, and I've justified every ruthless decision I've made by telling myself that business is business. That sentiment has no place in success. But watching you tonight, seeing what real courage looks like, I realized something. I've been successful, yes, but I've also been blind, willfully blind to the suffering that happens in the margins while people like me accumulate more wealth than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. Maya didn't interrupt. There was something about the way he was speaking, a kind of confessional intensity that suggested he needed to say this as much as she needed to hear it. "I want to create something," Blackwell, "a foundation. Something dedicated to helping people who fall through the cracks of our healthcare system. People like that young man's mother. People like your mother. And I want you to help me build it." Maya blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what? You're a waitress?" Blackwell said, and there was no condescension in the words, only statement of fact. "You're not qualified to run a foundation. Neither am I. Truth be told, I'm qualified to make money and intimidate competitors. But you have something that's far more valuable. You have empathy. You have lived experience. You understand the problems we'd be trying to solve because you've lived them. I can provide the resources and the infrastructure. You can provide the heart and the perspective." It was the most absurd job offer Maya had ever received, and she'd received some strange ones over the years. "Miss Blackwell," she said, trying to keep her voice level. "I appreciate the sentiment, but you don't know me. We've had one conversation. You can't possibly think I'm qualified to help run a foundation based on one act of courage." "One act of courage," Blackwell repeated, his eyes intense. "That saved lives and showed me what I'd been missing for decades. Miss Chun, I've built my career on reading people, on making quick decisions about who has what it takes to succeed. I'm rarely wrong. You have intelligence, compassion, and a kind of moral clarity that's vanishingly rare. Those aren't qualities you can teach. They're qualities you build through adversity. I'm offering you a chance to transform that adversity into something meaningful, something that could help thousands of people." Maya felt dizzy. This morning she'd woken up in her cramped apartment, worried about making rent and trying to figure out how to afford her mother's next prescription refill. Tonight she'd stared down a gunman, and now she was being offered a position in a foundation that didn't even exist yet by a billionaire she'd met 6 hours ago. It was too much, too fast, too unreal. I need time to think, he said. This is a lot to process. Of course, Blackwell said immediately. Take all the time you need. My offer stands. In the meantime, regardless of your decision about the foundation, I meant what I said about your mother's medical bills. Consider it dealt with. The words were so casual, so effortless, that Maya felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Gratitude, yes, but also resentment at how easy it was for him to solve a problem that had been destroying her life. He could write a check and fix everything, while she'd been slowly drowning for years. The inequality of it was staggering. I can't accept that, Maya said, her pride flaring. I don't take charity. It's not charity, Blackwell said firmly. It's payment for a debt. You saved my life tonight, Miss Chun. The young man had a gun pointed directly at me when you stepped between us. Do you understand what that means? It means I'm alive right now because you were willing to die in my place. There's no amount of money that repays that, but I can at least ensure that the financial burden that's been crushing you is lifted. Let me do this. Please. The please broke through her defenses. This powerful man, this titan of industry who probably hadn't said please to anyone in years, was asking her permission to help. Maya felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and standing on the edge of something that felt like it could either save her or destroy her. On one condition, she said. What's that? Blackwell asked. Tyler Morrison, the young man from tonight. You help him too. He needs a lawyer, a good one. And his mother needs care. Real care. Not just enough to keep her alive, but enough to give her quality of life. If you're serious about this foundation, about helping people who fall through the cracks, then start with him. He made a terrible choice, but he made it out of love. That has to count for something. Blackwell nodded slowly, a small smile touching his lips. You're already thinking like someone who runs a foundation, advocating for the vulnerable, looking for systemic solutions. All right, Miss Chun, I'll see that Tyler Morrison gets the best legal representation available, and I'll personally ensure his mother receives comprehensive care. You have my word. Maya held out her hand and Blackwell shook it. His grip was firm, and in that handshake she felt the sealing of something significant, a partnership forged in the crucible of crisis. Then you have my answer, Maya said. I'll help you build your foundation, but I have conditions. I want a real role, not a figurehead position. I want input on how the money is spent and who receives help. And I want to finish my degree. I dropped out 2 years ago when my mom got sick, but if I'm going to do this right, I need to finish my education. Agreed to all of it, Blackwell said without hesitation. I'll arrange for your tuition to be paid, and you'll have a full scholarship to any program you choose. As for your role in the foundation, you'll be the director of outreach and assessment. You'll be the one meeting with people, understanding their needs, and determining how we can best help. I'll handle the financial and legal infrastructure, but the heart of this operation will be yours. It was happening too fast, but Maya realized that opportunities like this didn't wait for perfect timing. They appeared in moments of crisis and chaos, and you either grabbed them or watched them disappear. Okay, she said, her voice stronger now. Let's do this. Let's build something that matters. Blackwell's smile was genuine, transforming his face from severe to almost paternal. I have a driver outside. He'll take you home. Get some rest, Miss Chun. Tomorrow your life begins again, and I suspect it's going to be quite different from the one you've been living. As Maya followed him out into the cool night air, she looked back at the Belmont Grand one last time. Just this morning it had been the place where she served food to people who barely saw her. Tomorrow it would be a memory, a launching point for something she couldn't quite imagine yet. The city stretched out before her, glittering with possibility, and for the first time in years, Maya Chun allowed herself to hope. The black town car that delivered Maya home was worth more than everything she owned combined. The driver, an older gentleman named James, who spoke with quiet professionalism, assured her that he would be available whenever she needed transportation in the coming days. Mr. Blackwell insists, he said with a small smile. It's no trouble at all, miss. Maya thanked him and stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk of Riverside, feeling the disconnect between the luxury vehicle in her neighborhood like a physical sensation. The car pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the night, and Maya stood for a moment in front of the aging apartment building she'd called home for the past 3 years. The lobby smelled of old cooking and cleaning solution, a smell so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. The elevator was broken again, so she climbed the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Her hands shook as she tried to fit her key into the lock, and it took 3 attempts before she managed to open the door. The apartment was dark except for the soft glow from her mother's bedroom. Maya could hear the familiar sound of the oxygen concentrator, its rhythmic hiss and whir as constant as a heartbeat. Mom? Maya called softly, setting her purse on the small table by the door. I'm home. Is that you, sweetheart? Her mother's voice came from the bedroom, thin but alert. You're so late. I was starting to worry. Maya walked into the bedroom and found her mother propped up against pillows, a book resting open on her lap. Sarah Chun was 51 years old but looked a decade older. Her face lined with pain and fatigue, her once vibrant black hair now streaked heavily with gray. The oxygen cannula wrapped around her face was as much a part of her appearance now as her gentle brown eyes. Long night at work, Maya said, sitting on the edge of the bed. She wanted to tell her mother everything that had happened, but looking at her fragile state, she hesitated. Sarah Chun had enough to worry about without adding armed robberies and life-threatening heroics to the list. But her mother was perceptive, had always been able to read Maya like an open book. Something happened, Sarah said, closing her book and setting it aside. I can see it in your face. Are you alright? Did someone hurt you? Maya took a deep breath. No one hurt me, she said, but something did happen. Something big. She told the story carefully, watching her mother's face cycle through shock, fear, pride, and finally tears. When Maya finished, Sarah reached out and took her daughter's hand with surprising strength. You could have been killed, she whispered. Oh, Maya, you could have died. I know, Maya said gently, but I didn't. And Mom, something good came out of it. Something that might change everything for us. She told her mother about Harrison Blackwell's offer, about the foundation, about the promise to help with their medical bills. As she spoke, she watched disbelief war with hope on her mother's face. Sweetheart, Sarah said slowly, you need to be careful. Men like that don't give something for nothing. There's always a price. Maybe, Maya acknowledged, but I think tonight genuinely affected him. I think he saw something that he'd been avoiding seeing his whole life. And even if his motives aren't entirely pure, even if there's ego involved in wanting to create this foundation, does that matter if it helps people? Does that matter if it means you can get the treatment you need? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her thumb rubbing absently over Maya's knuckles. When your father left, she said finally, I made myself a promise that I would never be dependent on anyone's charity, that I would work for everything we needed and take care of you and Marcus on my own. I've been so stubborn about that promise that I've let my pride hurt you and your brother. I've watched you sacrifice your education, your youth, your dreams to take care of me, and I've told myself it was noble to refuse help. But maybe it's not noble. Maybe it's just foolish. She looked up at Maya with tears in her eyes. If this man wants to help, if he's genuine, then I think you should let him. Not just for me, but for yourself. You deserve a chance at a real life, Maya. You deserve more than just surviving. The words broke something open in Maya, and she found herself crying, really crying for the first time since the crisis in the restaurant. All the fear, the adrenaline, the surreal nature of everything that had happened came pouring out. Her mother pulled her close, and they sat together in the dim bedroom with only the sound of the oxygen concentrator bearing witness to their shared tears. I'm scared, Maya admitted. I'm scared of trusting this, of believing it's real. What if it all falls apart? What if I'm making a mistake? Then you'll survive, Sarah said firmly. You're a survivor, Maya, that's what I've taught you. But surviving isn't living, and it's time you learned the difference. Take the chance. Build something with this man. Help people the way you helped that boy tonight. And if it all falls apart, then you'll still have the knowledge that you tried, that you reached for something more. That's more than most people can say. Maya pulled back and wiped her eyes. When did you get so wise? She asked with a watery laugh. The day I realized my daughter was braver than I could ever hope to be, Sarah replied. Now go get some sleep. Something tells me tomorrow is going to be the first day of a very different life. Maya kissed her mother's forehead and retreated to her own small bedroom. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing too fast for sleep. Somewhere in the city, Tyler Morrison was sitting in a jail cell, his future uncertain. Harrison Blackwell was probably in his penthouse, already setting plans in motion, making calls to lawyers and accountants. And she was here, caught between two worlds, about to step from one into another. She must have eventually slept because she woke to her phone ringing. Pale morning light filtered through her thin curtains. She fumbled for the phone and saw an unknown number. Hello, Miss Chun, this is Rebecca Winters. I'm Mr. Blackwell's personal assistant. He asked me to call and coordinate your schedule for the day. If you're available, Mr. Blackwell would like to meet with you at 10 this morning at his office to discuss the foundation and begin the incorporation process. He's also arranged for payment of your mother's outstanding medical bills and has scheduled her for a consultation with Dr. Marcus Reeves, one of the city's leading endocrinologists. The appointment is for 2 this afternoon, if that works for your mother's schedule. Maya sat up, her heart pounding. It was real. This was really happening. That sounds perfect, she managed to say. Thank you. Excellent, Rebecca said. I'm sending a car for you at 9:30. The address for Miss Blackwell's office is in the text message I'm about to send. Oh, and Miss Chun? Yes? Welcome to the team. By the time Maya had showered and dressed in the most professional outfit she owned, a simple black dress she usually reserved for job interviews, the story had broken. Her phone was flooded with notifications. The video from the restaurant had gone viral overnight. Multiple news outlets were running the story with headlines that made her cringe. Heroic waitress disarms gunman with compassion. Minimum wage worker saves billionaire's life. The new face of courage. Her phone rang again. This time it was her brother Marcus calling from his dorm room 2 states away. Maya, what the hell? You're all over the news. Are you okay? Why didn't you call me last night? I'm fine, Maya assured him. I was going to call today. I just needed to process everything first. Process? Maya, you face down a guy with a gun? That's not something you process, that's something you freak out about. Are you sure you're okay? I am now, Maya said. And Marcus, things are going to change. Good things. I'll explain everything when I see you, but I need you to trust me. Whatever you see in the news, whatever people are saying, just remember that I'm okay and things are finally looking up for us. They talked for a few more minutes until Maya heard the notification from the car service that her ride had arrived. She checked on her mother, who was still sleeping peacefully, left a note explaining where she'd gone, and headed downstairs. The black town car was waiting at the curb, and James was standing beside it with a warm smile. Good morning, Miss Chun. Ready for your first day? Maya took a deep breath of the crisp morning air and smiled back. Ready as I'll ever be. The drive to Blackwell Properties International took 30 minutes through morning traffic. Maya stared out the window, watching the city transform from her working-class neighborhood to the gleaming towers of the financial district. Each block seemed to represent a step up in the economic hierarchy, from bodegas and check-cashing stores to boutiques and artisanal coffee shops, to the marble and glass monuments to wealth and power. The Blackwell building was a sleek tower of black glass and steel that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Maya felt intimidated just looking at it. James escorted her through the lobby, where the security guards seemed to have been expecting her, and up a private elevator that opened directly into the penthouse suite. The offices of Harrison Blackwell occupied the entire top floor, a sprawling space of floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art, and furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. Rebecca Winters met her as she stepped out of the elevator. She was a woman in her mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, the kind of efficient energy that suggested she could run a small country if asked. "Miss Chun, welcome. Mr. Blackwell is finishing up a call, but he'll be with you momentarily. Can I get you coffee? Tea? Water? Coffee would be great," Maya said. "Black, please." Rebecca smiled. "Just like M.R. Blackwell. I think you two are going to work well together." She disappeared and returned moments later with coffee in a cup that probably cost more than Maya's entire dish collection. "Mr. Blackwell is ready for you now." She led Maya through the office to a pair of massive wooden doors, knocked once, pushed them open. The office beyond was enormous, dominated by windows that offered a panoramic view of the entire city. Harrison Blackwell stood at one of those windows, his back to the door, hands clasped behind him. When he turned, Maya saw that he looked different in the morning light, less severe, more approachable. He was wearing a navy suit but no tie, and there was an energy about him that suggested he'd been awake for hours, already working. "Miss Chun," he said, walking forward with his hand extended. "Thank you for coming. I hope you slept well." "As well as could be expected," Maya said, shaking his hand. "Good, because we have a lot to accomplish today." He gestured to a seating area with comfortable chairs and a low table. "The foundation paperwork is ready to file. I've had my legal team working through the night. We're calling it the Second Chance Foundation, unless you have objections to the name." Maya sat down, still trying to absorb the reality of where she was and what was happening. "The Second Chance Foundation. I like it. It's appropriate." Blackwell sat across from her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost uncertain. "Miss Chun, Maya, before we go any further, I need you to understand something. What I'm offering you isn't just a job, it's a responsibility. Once we file these papers, once we start accepting people's stories and their hopes, we become accountable to them. This foundation will have my name and my money behind it, but it will have your heart and your judgment guiding it. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility?" Maya looked at Harrison Blackwell and saw something she hadn't expected to see in a man of his stature: vulnerability. He wasn't just offering her a position, he was asking her to be his conscience, his connection to a world he'd spent decades insulating himself from. The weight of that request settled over her shoulders like a mantle, heavy but somehow right. "I've been responsible for keeping my family alive since I was 16 years old," Maya said quietly. "I've made impossible decisions about which bills to pay and which medications my mother could go without. I've watched people I love suffer because I couldn't do enough, couldn't be enough, couldn't earn enough. So yes, Mr. Blackwell, I understand responsibility. The question is, are you ready for what it means to actually help people instead of just writing checks and feeling good about yourself?" The words came out harder than she'd intended, but she didn't take them back. If this partnership was going to work, if she was going to trust him and trust this opportunity, then they needed to establish honesty as the foundation of their working relationship. She half expected him to bristle at her challenge, to remind her of the power imbalance between them. Instead, Harrison Blackwell smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "That's exactly why I need you," he said. "You're not going to let me take the easy way out. You're going to hold me accountable." "Good. That's what this needs." He reached for a folder on the table and opened it, revealing page after page of legal documents. This is the incorporation paperwork for the Second Chance Fund. I'm seeding it with an initial endowment of $50 million with provisions for additional funding as needed. The mission statement is simple: to provide financial assistance and comprehensive support to individuals and families facing medical crises who have fallen through the gaps in our healthcare system. But I want you to help me refine that. I want your input on how we structure the application process, how we evaluate cases, how we ensure the money goes to people who genuinely need it. Maya pulled the folder closer, her eyes scanning the dense legal language. $50 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like Monopoly money. But she knew what that amount could do. It could save lives, hundreds of them, thousands of them. "We can't just throw money at problems," Maya said, her mind already working logistics. "Money helps, obviously, but people in medical crises need more than just bill payment. They need coordination of care. They need someone to help them navigate the system, to fight with insurance companies, to find the right specialists. They need emotional support. They need someone to see them as human beings, not just case numbers." She looked up at Blackwell. "If we're going to do this right, we need to build a team. Social workers, medical advocates, financial counselors. We need to treat each case holistically, not just write checks. Blackwell was nodding, pulling out a tablet and making notes as she spoke. What else? What am I not thinking of? Transportation, Maya said, warming to the subject. People in crisis often can't afford gas to get to appointments. They miss crucial follow-ups because they can't get there, and housing. If someone is going through cancer treatment but they're also worried about making rent, the stress undermines their recovery. And childcare. Single parents who are sick can't work, which means they can't pay for daycare, which means they can't make it to their own medical appointments. It's a cascade of impossible choices. She paused, suddenly self-conscious. Sorry, I'm probably overwhelming you with details. No, Blackwell said firmly. This is perfect. This is exactly the perspective I need. You're thinking systemically. You understand that poverty isn't just about lack of money, it's about lack of infrastructure, lack of support, lack of options. He set down his tablet and looked at her with something approaching awe. How did someone your age become so insightful about these issues? Maya felt a flicker of old pain. By living them, she said simply. By watching my mother choose between food and medication. By dropping out of college because tuition and medical bills couldn't coexist. By learning that the system is designed for people who already have resources, and everyone else just has to survive in the margins. I didn't study this in a classroom, Mr. Blackwell. I got my education in hospital billing offices and pharmacy lines and late-night panic attacks about money I didn't have. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Blackwell spoke, his voice softer than she'd heard before. My father built his fortune during the recession of the 1980s. He made his money buying distressed properties from families who'd lost everything. He used to say that business was a war and casualties were inevitable. I idolized him. I built my entire career on his model. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. When I watched you step between that young man and me last night, I realized something. My father was wrong. Business doesn't have to be war. Success doesn't require casualties. I've spent 40 years winning battles and losing my humanity in the process. I want to spend whatever time I have left trying to recover it. Maya joined him at the window. The city sprawled below them, millions of people going about their lives, each carrying their own burdens, their own struggles, most of them invisible to the man who'd built his empire in this tower. This isn't going to be easy, she said. People are going to question your motives. They're going to say it's a publicity stunt or a tax write-off. Some will be skeptical that real change can come from someone in your position. Let them question, Blackwell said. Let them be skeptical. Prove them wrong by doing the work, by being transparent about where the money goes and who it helps, by measuring our success not in press releases but in lives actually changed. He turned to her. Are you with me on this? Maya extended her hand. I'm with you, but I have one condition. What's that? Tyler Morrison. I want his case to be the first one the foundation officially takes on. I want to show him and everyone else that we meant what we said, that we see people, not just problems. Blackwell shook her hand. Consider it done. I've already retained David Chun, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state. He's meeting with Tyler this afternoon, and Tyler's mother Patricia has an appointment with Dr. Reeves tomorrow. He'll be coordinating her care personally. Maya felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you for keeping your word. A man is only as good as his word, Blackwell said. It's one of the few lessons from my father I still believe in. They spent the next 4 hours working through the details of the foundation. Rebecca brought in lunch, which they ate while reviewing organizational charts and discussing hiring needs. Blackwell had already identified office space in a building he owned downtown, something accessible and welcoming rather than intimidating. He showed Maya the floor plans, asking her opinion on layout and design. We need comfortable spaces, Maya insisted. Private consultation rooms where people can tell their stories without feeling like they're in a corporate office. We need toys and books for kids. We need coffee and snacks because people will be waiting, and if they're in crisis, they probably haven't eaten properly in days. Make it feel like a home, not an institution. Blackwell made note of everything, never once dismissing her ideas or overriding her judgment. It was a collaboration in the truest sense, and Maya found herself relaxing into the role, her initial nervousness giving way to genuine excitement. Around 3 in the afternoon, Rebecca knocked and entered with an apologetic expression. Miss Blackwell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have a call from Gerald Hawthorne. He says it's urgent. Blackwell's face tightened. Gerald Hawthorne was the CEO of Hawthorne Industries, one of Blackwell's biggest competitors. Tell him I'll call him back, Blackwell said. He insists it's time sensitive. It's regarding the Riverside Development Project. Maya saw Blackwell's jaw clench. The Riverside Development Project, her neighborhood. She'd heard about it, everyone in Riverside had. A massive redevelopment plan that would demolish dozens of old apartment buildings, including hers, to make way for luxury condos and upscale retail. The residents were being offered buyouts, but the amounts were insulting, not nearly enough to afford housing anywhere else in the city. Blackwell looked at Maya, and she saw conflict in his eyes. I need to take this. It'll just be a few minutes. Maya nodded, and Blackwell stepped into an adjacent office, closing the door behind him. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see him through the glass wall, his posture tense, his free hand gesturing sharply as he spoke. Rebecca appeared with fresh coffee. The Riverside project has been contentious, she said quietly. Mr. Blackwell has been under pressure from his board to move forward with it. The potential profit is substantial, but Maya could hear what Rebecca wasn't saying. The profit would come at the cost of displacing hundreds of families, people who had nowhere else to go, who would be pushed even further to the margins. When Blackwell returned, he looked troubled. That was about a new timeline for the Riverside development. Hawthorne has been trying to acquire some of the parcels I own in the area. He's pushing for us to coordinate our efforts and accelerate the project. Maya kept her voice neutral. That's the development that's going to demolish most of my neighborhood. Blackwell met her eyes. Yes, it is. And what did you tell him? Maya asked. I told him I needed more time to consider my option. The tension in the room was suddenly palpable. This was the first real test of their partnership. The first moment where Blackwell's business interests directly conflicted with the values he'd claimed to embrace. Maya, Blackwell said slowly, I want you to understand something. That project was set in motion years ago. There are contracts, investors, legal obligations. It's not something I can simply walk away from without significant consequences. I know that, Maya said, but I also know that there are people in those buildings who have lived there for decades. They're not just obstacles to your profit margin. They're human beings with lives and memories and nowhere else to go. I know, Blackwell said, and for the first time since she'd arrived that morning, he looked every one of his 62 years, tired and burdened. I know, and I don't have an answer right now, but I promise you I'll think about it. I'll look for alternatives. Maya wanted to push harder to demand that he cancel the project entirely, but she recognized that change didn't happen overnight. She'd asked him if he was ready for what it meant to actually help people, and now she had to give him space to figure out what that meant in practice. Okay, she said, think about it, but think about it from the perspective of someone who lives in one of those apartments, someone like my mother, someone like me, because if this foundation is going to mean anything, it has to start with the choices you make about your own business. Blackwell nodded slowly. You're right, and I will. I promise. The afternoon ended with them scheduling their next meeting and Blackwell providing Maya with a company credit card for any expenses she needed. As James drove her back to Riverside, Maya stared out the window, processing everything that had happened. In less than 24 hours, her entire life had transformed. She had a new career, new resources, new hope, but she also had new complications. Harrison Blackwell was a man trying to change, but he was still tethered to the systems and decisions of his past. The question was whether he could truly break free from those tethers, or whether the weight of his empire would pull him back to old patterns. As the car pulled up to her building, Maya saw it with new eyes. The cracked sidewalks, the peeling paint, the tired faces of neighbors sitting on stoops in the late afternoon sun. This was a community, flawed, struggling, but alive. And if Blackwell went through with his development project, it would all be erased, replaced with glass and steel and people who would never know what had been here before. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, her mind already working on strategies, on ways to make Blackwell see what she saw. The Second Chance Foundation was supposed to help people in crisis, but what did it mean if the man funding it was simultaneously creating crises for others? It was a question that would haunt her in the days to come. The Second Chance Foundation officially opened its doors 3 weeks after that fateful night at the Belmont Grand. The office space that Harrison Blackwell had secured was on the ground floor of a building in the Midtown District, strategically positioned between the wealthy downtown core and the working-class neighborhoods that surrounded it. Maya had spent every day of those 3 weeks transforming the sterile commercial space into something that felt welcoming and safe. She'd chosen warm paint colors, comfortable furniture that didn't look institutional, and filled the waiting area with plants, books, and toys for children. On the wall behind the reception desk, she'd hung a simple mission statement that she'd written herself. Everyone deserves a second chance at health, hope, and dignity. We're here to help make that possible. The staff Maya had helped hire reflected her vision for holistic care. There was Jennifer Martinez, a social worker with 15 years of experience navigating healthcare systems and advocating for vulnerable populations. Marcus Thompson, a financial counselor who specialized in medical debt negotiation and had himself declared bankruptcy after his daughter's cancer treatment. And Dr. Sarah Kim, a semi-retired family practice physician who volunteered 3 days a week to provide medical consultation and help applicants understand their diagnoses, treatment options. Rebecca had transitioned from being solely Blackwell's assistant to splitting her time between his office and the foundation, bringing her formidable organizational skills to manage the operational side of things. The response to the foundation's opening had been overwhelming. Within hours of announcing their services, the phone lines were flooded with calls. People who had been quietly suffering, making impossible choices, suddenly had a lifeline. Maya found herself conducting intake interviews 12 hours a day, listening to stories that broke her heart and strengthened her resolve in equal measure. There was Michael, a construction worker who had fallen from scaffolding and whose workers' compensation had run out before his rehabilitation was complete. There was Aisha, a single mother of 3 whose youngest child had cystic fibrosis and whose insurance had denied coverage for a medication that could dramatically improve his quality of life. There was James, a veteran with PTSD and a degenerative spine condition who had been cycling through emergency rooms because he couldn't afford to see a specialist. Each story was unique, but they all shared a common thread. These were people who had done everything right, worked hard, followed the rules, and still found themselves drowning. The system had failed them, and they had nowhere else to turn. Maya sat with each person, listened to their stories without judgment, and worked with the team to develop comprehensive support plan. The foundation didn't just pay bills, they connected people with specialists, negotiated with hospitals and insurance companies, arranged transportation, provided mental health counseling, and followed up to ensure that the help they provided actually resulted in improved health outcomes. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, but it was also the most meaningful work Maya had ever done. Harrison Blackwell visited the foundation office almost daily, usually in the late afternoon. He would sit in on case meetings, listen to the staff discuss challenges and successes, and ask questions that showed he was genuinely trying to understand the work they were doing. Maya watched him transform over those weeks. The severe, intimidating tycoon she'd first met was gradually being replaced by someone more human, more engaged. He remembered the names of the people they were helping. He would ask about specific cases, wanting to know if Michael's physical therapy was progressing or if Aisha's son was responding well to his new medication. One afternoon, Maya found him in the waiting area playing blocks with a little boy whose mother was in a consultation with Jennifer. The sight of this powerful man sitting cross-legged on the floor, his expensive suit forgotten, building a tower with a 4-year-old, made something shift in her perception of him. But the Riverside Development Project loomed over everything like a dark cloud. Blackwell hadn't made a decision yet, and Maya could see the tension it created. His board was pressuring him to move forward. Gerald Hawthorne had made a substantial offer to buy out Blackwell's interest in the properties, an offer that would net him tens of millions in profit. From a purely business perspective, it made sense, but Maya couldn't separate the businessmen making deals from the philanthropists claiming to care about vulnerable people. How could he fund a foundation dedicated to helping people in crisis while simultaneously placing hundreds of families and creating new crises? The contradiction was glaring, and it created a strain in their working relationship that neither of them quite knew how to address. One evening, as Maya was preparing to close the office for the day, Blackwell appeared with Thai food and 2 bottles of water. "I thought we could talk," he said. "Just the two of us. No staff, no agenda." Maya was tired, and part of her wanted to just go home to her mother and her brother Marcus, who was home for spring break, but she recognized an olive branch when she saw one. "Okay," she said, clearing space on her desk for the food containers. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Blackwell finally spoke. "I've been thinking about Riverside constantly," he said. "I lie awake at night trying to figure out how to thread this needle. My board thinks I'm losing my head. Hawthorne is circling like a shark, ready to take advantage of any perceived weakness. And you look at me every day with barely concealed disappointment." "I'm not disappointed in you," Maya said carefully. "I'm disappointed in the situation. You're trying to be better, I see that. But being better requires making hard choices, and so far you haven't made one." Blackwell set down his food and rubbed his face with both hands. "The development project has contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. If I pull out, I'll be sued. My company will take a massive financial hit. Some of my investors could lose significant money. The ripple effects would be substantial. Those are real consequences," Maya acknowledged. "But so is displacing 300 families. So is destroying a community. So is prioritizing profit over people." She leaned forward. "You told me you wanted to recover your humanity. This is what that looks like. It's not easy. It's not convenient, and it's going to cost you something. The question is whether you're willing to pay that price." Blackwell looked at her with something that might have been admiration or might have been frustration. She couldn't tell. "You don't pull punches, do you?" "If I did, I wouldn't be useful to you," Maya said. "You didn't hire me to tell you what you want to hear. You hired me to tell you the truth. And the truth is that you can't have it both ways. You can't be the hero and the villain in the same story. You have to choose." They were interrupted by Maya's phone ringing. She glanced at the screen and saw it was David Chun, Tyler Morrison's attorney. She answered him. "David, what's up?" "Maya, we have a hearing date set for Tyler 3 weeks from now. The prosecutor's willing to consider a plea deal, given the circumstances and Tyler's lack of prior criminal history, but it's going to require some creative advocacy. I wanted to loop you in because your testimony about what happened that night is going to be crucial." "Of course," Maya said. "Whatever Tyler needs, I'm there." After she hung up, Blackwell looked curious. "How's he doing?" Maya asked about Tyler regularly, but Blackwell's access to information was better than hers. "As well as can be expected," Blackwell said. "Jail is hard on someone like him. He's scared, remorseful, and worried sick about his mother. The good news is that Patricia is responding well to treatment, Dr. Reeves has her on a new regimen, and her oxygen levels have stabilized. Tyler knows that, and it's the only thing keeping him going." "That's something," Maya said. "At least he knows his mother's being cared for." "That's everything," Blackwell corrected. "That's why he did what he did. Fear for his mother drove him to make a terrible choice. I understand that now in a way I wouldn't have before all of this." He gestured around the office. "Before you, really. You've taught me to look past the surface of people's actions to the desperation underneath." Maya felt a warmth in her chest at his words, but she also felt the weight of his expectation. "I'm not trying to be your teacher or your conscience," she said. "I'm just trying to do good work and help people. Whether you change or not, that's your choice. But I hope you do. I hope you choose the harder path because it's the right one." Blackwell was quiet for a long moment, then he stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "I'm going to tell you something I haven't told anyone else," he said. "My father built his fortune ruthlessly, as I mentioned before. But what I didn't tell you was that in his final years he had regrets, real, painful regrets. He used to sit in his study looking at all the trophies of his success, and he'd say to me, "I won every battle and lost the war." I asked him what he meant, and he said, "I meant to build something that mattered, Harrison. Instead, I just built something big." I didn't understand what he meant then. I thought he was just getting sentimental in his old age, but now I think I finally get it. He turned back to Maya. "I don't want to end up like him, sitting in a room full of expensive things, knowing I wasted my chance to matter. The Riverside development represents everything I've been my whole career. Profit over people, growth over community, winning over wisdom. If I can't walk away from it, if I can't make a different choice even when it costs me, then nothing else I do means anything. The foundation becomes just a vanity project, a way to buy indulgences for my sins." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. She stood up and walked over to him. "So what are you going to do?" Blackwell took a deep breath. "I'm going to cancel the development. I'm going to take the hit, fight the lawsuits, and figure out something better to do with those properties. Something that actually serves the community instead of erasing it. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know it starts with stopping the harm." Maya couldn't help herself. She hugged him, this complicated man who was trying so hard to become someone better. "Thank you," she whispered, "for choosing people." Blackwell returned the embrace awkwardly, clearly unused to physical affection. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "This is going to get ugly. My board is going to revolt. I'll probably be forced out as CEO. Hawthorne is going to come after me with everything he's got. The business press is going to eviscerate. Then we'll face it together," Maya said, pulling back. "You're not alone in this." Blackwell smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "That means more than you know." The next morning, Harrison Blackwell called an emergency board meeting. Maya wasn't there, but Rebecca called her afterward to tell her what had happened. "It was brutal," Rebecca said, her voice tight. The board members were furious. 3 of them threatened to resign. "There's talk of a shareholder lawsuit." Mr. Blackwell stood his ground, but it cost him. He's agreed to step down as CEO within 6 months and transition to a chairman role. He's essentially sacrificing his control of the company. Maya felt a complex mix of emotions. Victory that Blackwell had made the right choice, but also guilt that her influence had contributed to his professional downfall. "Is he okay?" "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "He's in his office now, not taking calls. I think he might need to hear from you." Maya got in her car and drove straight to the Blackwell building. She rode the elevator up to the penthouse and found Blackwell sitting at his desk, staring at nothing. The defeat in his posture was heartbreaking. "You came," he said when he saw her. "Of course I came," Maya said. "I heard what happened. I'm sorry." Blackwell shook his head. "Don't be sorry. This is what I chose. This is what needed to happen. But knowing something is right doesn't make it easy," Maya said. "You gave up everything you've worked for." "Not everything," Blackwell said. "I gave up control of a company, but I kept my integrity. And honestly, that feels like a fair trade. Besides, stepping back from day-to-day operations means I'll have more time to focus on the foundation. We're going to need to scale up to handle the demand. There's so much more we can do." The news of Harrison Blackwell's decision to cancel the Riverside development and step down as CEO spread through the business world like wildfire. The reaction was predictably split along ideological lines. The business press portrayed him as a man who'd lost his edge, gone soft, betrayed his shareholders and his own legacy. A scathing editorial in the Financial Chronicle called him a cautionary tale of what happens when sentiment overtakes sound business judgment. Wall Street analysts downgraded Blackwell Properties stock, wiping billions off its market value. 3 board members made good on their threats and resigned in protests, issuing statements about fiduciary duty and shareholder value that barely concealed their rage at being denied a massive payday. But there was another reaction too, one that surprised both Maya and Blackwell in its intensity. Community organizations in Riverside and across the city held rallies celebrating the decision. Local news channels ran human interest stories about the families who wouldn't be displaced, the small businesses that wouldn't be shuttered, the neighborhood that would survive. Social media exploded with support for Blackwell, with hashtags like real leadership and people over profit trending for days. The viral video of Maya facing down Tyler Morrison at the restaurant resurfaced, now paired with Blackwell's decision, creating a narrative about compassion and courage that resonated far beyond their city. Letters poured into the Second Chance Foundation from people across the country, thanking Blackwell for his decision and asking how they could support the foundation's work. Maya watched all of this with a mixture of pride and trepidation. They had won a battle, but she knew the war was far from over. Gerald Hawthorne, in particular, wasn't the type of man to accept defeat gracefully. Within a week of Blackwell's announcement, Hawthorne made his move. He launched a hostile takeover attempt of Blackwell Properties, arguing to shareholders that the company needed new leadership that would prioritize profits over publicity stunts. He had the backing of the 3 board members who'd resigned, and he was making a compelling case to institutional investors who were spooked by the stock price drop. Blackwell spent his days fighting off the takeover attempt, working with lawyers and friendly shareholders to maintain control of his family's company. It was brutal corporate warfare, the kind he'd once excelled at, but now he was fighting from a position of weakness with divided support. Maya threw herself into the foundation's work, trying to ignore the business drama swirling around them. Tyler Morrison's hearing was approaching, and she spent hours preparing her testimony with David Chun. The prosecutor had offered a plea deal, 3 years probation, mandatory counseling, and 500 hours of community service in exchange for pleading guilty to attempted armed robbery. It was a reasonable offer given the circumstances, but David wanted to do better. He believed they could argue for a more lenient sentence if they could convince the judge that Tyler deserved a true second chance. "Your testimony is crucial," David told Maya during one of their prep sessions. "The judge needs to see that Tyler isn't a hardened criminal. He's a kid who made one terrible choice out of desperation, and he's capable of redemption. You're the person who saw that in him when everyone else just saw a threat. If you can make the judge see what you saw, we might get him probation with no jail time." The day of the hearing arrived on a gray morning that threatened rain. Maya wore her most professional outfit and met David and Tyler at the courthouse. Tyler looked thin and scared in his orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled. When he saw Maya, his eyes filled with tears. "Miss Chun," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't think you'd come." "I told you I would," Maya said, reaching out to squeeze his shoulder. "We're going to get through this." The courtroom was smaller than Maya had expected, wood-paneled and formal, with high ceilings that made every sound echo. Tyler's mother, Patricia, was there, looking much healthier than she had in months thanks to Dr. Reeves's treatment. She sat in the front row, clutching a tissue, her oxygen cannula, a thin reminder of the crisis that had driven her son to his desperate act. The prosecutor was a stern-faced woman named Catherine Walsh, who had a reputation for being tough but fair. She laid out the facts of the case with clinical precision. Tyler Morrison entered the Belmont Grand Restaurant armed with a loaded weapon. He threatened patrons and staff. He demanded money. The fact that no one was injured was largely due to the intervention of Miss Maya Chun, who showed extraordinary courage in de-escalating ways. But the defendant's good fortune in not harming anyone doesn't erase the terror he inflicted or the crime he attempted. When it was David Chun's turn, he painted a different picture. He presented medical records documenting Patricia Morrison's deteriorating condition and the insurance company's denial of coverage. He showed the court collection notices and eviction threats that had been piling up in Tyler's mailbox. He brought in character witnesses, teachers, and employers who testified to Tyler's gentle nature and his devotion to his mother. And then he called Maya to the stand. She walked to the witness box, her heart pounding, and placed her hand on the Bible as she was sworn in. David's questions were gentle, designed to let her tell the story in her own words. She described seeing Tyler in the restaurant, recognizing the fear beneath his bravado. She talked about stepping between him and Blackwell, not because she was fearless, but because she understood what desperation looked like. "I've been there," Maya said, her voice steady but emotional. "Not with a gun, obviously, but with that feeling that you're drowning and no one sees you, that you've run out of options and the people who are supposed to help you have turned their backs." Tyler wasn't a criminal that night. He was a scared kid who thought he had no other choice. He's wrong about that, obviously. There are always other choices. But when you're in that moment when someone you love is dying and you're powerless to stop it, rational thinking goes out the window. The prosecutor had the opportunity to cross-examine, and Catherine Walsh was thorough, but not cruel. She established that Tyler had indeed pointed a loaded weapon at people, that he had terrified dozens of innocent diners, that his desperation didn't negate the danger he'd created. But when she asked Maya if she'd been afraid, Maya's answer seemed to catch her off guard. "Yes," Maya said. "I was terrified, but I was also sad. Sad for Tyler, sad for his mother, sad for all of us in that room who'd somehow created a society where a 19-year-old kid feels like armed robbery is his only option to save his mother's life. That's not about one person's crime. That's about all of our failures." The courtroom was silent when Maya stepped down from the witness stand. She returned to her seat next to Harrison Blackwell, who had arrived quietly during David's opening statement. He reached over and squeezed her hand, a gesture of support and solidarity. The judge, an older black woman named Lorraine Foster, had been taking notes throughout the proceedings. When it was time for her ruling, she removed her glasses and looked directly at Tyler. "Mr. Morrison," she began, "what you did was serious. You terrorized innocent people. You broke the law, and there must be consequences for that. But I've been on the bench for 23 years, and I've learned to distinguish between criminals and people in crisis. You are clearly the latter." She looked at the paperwork before her. "I've reviewed your record. You've never been in trouble before. Your teachers describe you as kind and responsible. Your employers say you're hardworking and reliable. And most importantly, I see that your mother is now receiving proper medical care thanks to intervention from the Second Chance Foundation and Mr. Harrison Blackwell." She looked at Maya. Ms. Chun's testimony was compelling. "She saw something in you that night that I hope you can see in yourself. The capacity for good, for growth, for redemption. I'm going to give you that chance." Judge Foster sentenced Tyler to 2 years of supervised probation, mandatory counseling, and 300 hours of community service at the Second Chance Foundation. No jail time. The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. Patricia Morrison sobbed with relief. David Chun allowed himself a small smile of victory, and Tyler, tears streaming down his face, mouthed thank you to Maya across the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. The story had captured public imagination, the perfect narrative of justice tempered with mercy. Maya tried to deflect attention, but Blackwell stepped forward, his natural authority commanding the crowd. "Today's ruling represents what our justice system can be at its best," he said. "Tyler Morrison made a mistake, but he's not defined by his worst moment. He's being given a second chance, just like the foundation we've created is designed to give second chances to people facing medical crisis. This is what compassion looks like. This is what redemption looks like. A reporter shouted a question about the hostile takeover attempt. M.R. Blackwell. Is it true that Gerald Hawthorne is close to acquiring enough shares to force you out completely? Blackwell's expression hardened slightly. M.R. Hawthorne is free to try, he said. But I'm not concerned about corporate battles right now. I'm focused on the work that matters. The foundation has helped over 100 families in just 3 weeks. We're making a real difference in people's lives. That's what I care about. Another reporter pressed, but sir, if Hawthorne succeeds, he could shut down the foundation. He's publicly stated that it's a waste of shareholder resources. Blackwell met the reporter's eyes. Then I guess we'll have to make sure he doesn't succeed. The press conference wrapped up and they all headed back to the foundation office. Tyler was released from custody into his mother's care with instructions to report to his probation officer the next day. When they arrived at the foundation, Maya pulled Tyler aside. You're going to start your community service here next week, she said. I want you to help with intake interviews. I want you to meet other people who are in crisis, who are facing the same impossible choices you've faced. And I want you to help us figure out how to reach people before they get to that breaking point. Tyler nodded, still processing everything that had happened. Why are you doing this for me? He asked. Why do you care? Because someone cared about me once, Maya said. Because I believe people deserve second chances. And because I saw something in you that night that I don't want the world to lose. You have empathy, Tyler. You understand suffering. That's a gift, even though it doesn't feel like one right now. We need people like you in this fight. That evening, after everyone else had gone home, Maya and Blackwell sat in the foundation office, both exhausted but strangely energized. It's been quite a month, Blackwell said. A month ago, I was a ruthless businessman focused solely on profit. Now I'm fighting off a hostile takeover and running a charity. My father would be horrified. Or proud, Maya suggested. You said he had regrets. Maybe he'd be glad you're making different choices. Blackwell smiled. Maybe. He looked around the office at all the photos they'd hung on the walls, pictures of the families they'd helped, smiling faces that represented crises averted and lives saved. I've been thinking about what comes next, he said. If Hawthorne succeeds in taking over my company, I'll lose most of my wealth. The foundation will need a new funding model. We can't rely on my personal fortune indefinitely. Maya had been thinking about the same thing. We could seek other donors, she said. Corporate partnerships, grant funding. There are ways to sustain this work beyond your personal investment. And honestly, maybe that would be better. Maybe it shouldn't all depend on one person's wealth. Maybe we should build something that's truly community supported. Blackwell nodded slowly. You're right, as usual. He stood up and stretched. I should go. Long day tomorrow. More meetings with lawyers and shareholders. The glamorous life of corporate warfare. Before he left, he turned back to Maya. Thank you, he said simply, for pushing me, for believing I could be better, for showing me what matters. Maya smiled. Thank you for listening, for changing, for proving that it's never too late to choose differently. After he left, Maya stayed in the office for a while longer, looking at the mission statement on the wall. Everyone deserves a second chance. They were living proof of that truth. Tyler was getting his second chance. Blackwell was getting his. And in helping others find theirs, Maya had found her own purpose, her own path forward. The question now was whether they could sustain it, whether the foundation they'd built could survive the storms that were gathering on the horizon. The hostile takeover battle intensified over the following weeks, consuming Blackwell's time and energy in ways that worried Maya. She watched him age before her eyes, the stress etching deeper lines in his face, stealing the light that had begun to return to his eyes. Gerald Hawthorne was relentless, employing every tactic in the corporate warfare playbook. He leaked damaging stories to the business press about Blackwell's mental state, suggesting that his decision to cancel the Riverside development was evidence of cognitive decline. He courted institutional investors with promises of restored profitability and aggressive growth. He even approached Rebecca, offering her triple her salary to come work for him and bring inside information about Blackwell's strategies. Rebecca refused without hesitation and told Blackwell immediately, but the attempt itself was chilling. It showed that Hawthorne would stop at nothing to win. Maya tried to shield the foundation from the corporate drama, but it was impossible to completely separate the two worlds. Several major donors who had pledged support for the foundation quietly withdrew their commitments, not wanting to be associated with what the business community increasingly saw as Blackwell's public unraveling. A planned feature in a major philanthropic magazine was canceled without explanation, and most troubling, they started receiving threatening letters at the foundation office. Anonymous missives claiming they were communist sympathizers trying to destroy American business, that they were enabling freeloaders and undermining personal responsibility. The letters were disturbing enough that Maya reported them to the police, though the detective she spoke with seemed more annoyed than concerned. Through it all, the foundation's work continued and expanded. Maya had developed a system for evaluating applications that balanced urgent need with long-term impact. They were helping an average of 15 new families per week, addressing everything from cancer treatment costs to emergency surgeries to chronic disease management. Jennifer Martinez had built relationships with major hospital systems, negotiating better payment plans and often securing significant reductions in bill charge. Marcus Thompson had successfully contested dozens of insurance denials, winning coverage for treatments that companies had initially refused to pay for. And Dr. Kim had become invaluable in helping patients understand understand their options and advocate for themselves in medical settings where they'd previously felt powerless and ignored. Tyler Morrison had begun his community service at the foundation, and Maya had been right about his potential. He had a natural ability to connect with people in crisis, to make them feel seen and heard in their darkest moments. She often watched him conducting intake interviews, noting how his own experience had given him a credibility and empathy that couldn't be taught. People opened up to him in ways they sometimes didn't, even with the professional staff. He understood their fear, their shame, their desperate calculations about which bills to pay and which to ignore. He'd lived it, and that authenticity was powerful. One afternoon, Tyler came to Maya's office with a proposal. He'd been thinking about prevention, about reaching people before they hit rock bottom the way he had. What if we created a program for young people, he suggested. Education about healthcare systems, financial literacy, knowing where to get help before things become catastrophic. I think about all the kids like me who don't know what resources exist until it's too late. If we could reach them earlier, maybe we could prevent some of the crises we're treating now. Maya was impressed. Exactly the kind of systemic thinking the foundation needed. Let's develop it, she said. Put together a proposal. We'll present it to Blackwell and the board. But Tyler's face fell. I heard some of the staff talking, he said. They're worried about funding. If Mr. Blackwell loses his company, what happens to us? It was a question Maya had been avoiding, but it needed to be addressed. She'd been having quiet conversations with several major foundations and charitable organizations, exploring partnership possibility, but nothing concrete had materialized yet. We'll figure it out, Maya said with more confidence than she felt. This work is too important to let it die. We'll find a way to sustain it. But privately, she was scared. The foundation had become her life, her purpose. The thought of it being shuttered because of corporate machinations made her physically ill. The crisis came on a Thursday afternoon. Maya was in a meeting with a family when Rebecca burst in, her face pale. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. It's Mr. Blackwell. He's in the hospital. His heart stopped. What happened? He collapsed during a board meeting. They think it's a heart attack. He's at City General. He's asking for you. Maya didn't remember the drive to the hospital. One moment she was in the foundation office, and the next she was running through the emergency room entrance, demanding to know where Harrison Blackwell was. A nurse directed her to the cardiac care unit, where she found Blackwell in a bed surrounded by monitors and 4 lines. He looked small and vulnerable, so different from the powerful man she'd come to know. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, and for a terrible moment Maya thought she was too late. Then his eyes opened and found her. Maya, he said, his voice weak but clear. You came. Of course I came, she said, taking his hand. What were you thinking, working yourself to death like this? You're not invincible, you know. A small smile touched his lips. Apparently not. The doctor says it was a warning. Stress-induced angina, not a full heart attack, but close enough to scare the hell out of me. He squeezed her hand weakly. I've been a fool, Maya, fighting Hawthorne, trying to hold on to the company. It's all ego. I've been so focused on not losing that I forgot what I was fighting for in the first place. You were fighting for the foundation, Maya said, for the work we're doing, for the people we're helping. No, Blackwell said. I was fighting to prove I was still the Harrison Blackwell who never lost a battle. I was fighting to show the business world that I hadn't gone soft. But lying here with my heart trying to kill me, I realized something. I don't care what the business world thinks. I don't care if Hawthorne takes my company. I care about you and the foundation and the work we've built together. That's the only thing that matters. Maya felt tears streaming down her face. Then let it go, she said. Let Hawthorne have the company. Focus on getting better and on the work you actually care about. We'll figure out how to fund the foundation. We'll find other donors, apply for grants, build something sustainable that doesn't depend on corporate warfare. Blackwell looked at her for a long moment. You really believe that's possible? I have to believe it, Maya said, because the alternative is unacceptable. The work we're doing saves lives. It gives people hope. It matters more than stock prices and boardroom victories. You taught me that. You showed me that it's never too late to choose differently. So choose differently now. Choose your health over your ego. Choose meaning over winning. A doctor entered the room, a young woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Mr. Blackwell needs rest, she said, and significantly less stress. Whatever's been happening in your life needs to stop, or the next time you might not be so lucky. She looked at Maya. Are you family? I'm his partner, Maya said, and realized as she said it that it was true in every way that mattered. Good, the doctor said, then you need to make sure he follows orders. No stress, no work, just rest and recovery. Can you do that? I can, Maya promised. The doctor left and Maya turned back to Blackwell. I'm calling Rebecca. We're issuing a statement that you're accepting Hawthorne's offer and stepping away from the company entirely. You're going to recover, and then we're going to rebuild the foundation's funding model together. No more fighting battles that don't matter. Blackwell nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. Okay, he said. Okay, you're right. Let it all go. For the first time since I met you, I feel like I can finally breathe. Over the next few days, the business world exploded with the news. Harrison Blackwell, legendary corporate titan, had essentially surrendered to Gerald Hawthorne. He'd accepted a buyout of his remaining shares at a significantly reduced price and was exiting the company his grandfather had founded. The business press declared it the end of an era, with some calling it a humiliating defeat and others suggesting it was a dignified exit from a battle he couldn't win. But to Maya, watching Blackwell recover in his hospital bed, growing stronger each day as the stress fell away, it looked like victory. He'd chosen life over legacy, meaning over money, and in doing so, he'd found a kind of peace she suspected he'd been searching for his entire career. The foundation staff rallied around them. Rebecca immediately began reaching out to potential donors, crafting a compelling case for support that emphasized their track record of impact. Jennifer, Marcus, and Dr. Kim all volunteered to take pay cuts if necessary to keep the foundation running. Tyler started a social media campaign that went viral, using his own story to illustrate why the foundation's work mattered. The response was overwhelming. Small donations poured in from ordinary people who'd been following their story, moved by the narrative of redemption and second chances. Several mid-sized foundations expressed interest in partnership, and surprisingly, 3 former board members of Blackwell Properties who'd opposed the Riverside development cancellation reached out privately to offer significant personal donations, apparently having experienced their own moral reckonings. 1 week after his hospital admission, Blackwell was released with strict instructions about diet, exercise, and stress management. Maya drove him not to his penthouse, but to a modest townhouse he'd recently purchased in a quiet neighborhood. No more living above the city like some corporate deity, he'd said. I want to live in it with real people and real problems. The townhouse was warm and comfortable, filled with books and art and windows that let in natural light. It felt like a home, not a showplace. Maya helped him settle in, making sure his medications were organized and his refrigerator was stocked with the heart-healthy food his doctor had prescribed. As she prepared to leave, Blackwell called her back. Maya, wait. There's something I need to tell you. He gestured for her to sit. I've made a decision about the foundation's future. I'm establishing a permanent endowment of $100 million. It's from the buyout money, everything left after taxes, and settling my obligations. The foundation will have financial security for decades. You won't have to worry about funding anymore. Maya stared at him, speechless. That's almost everything you have left. It's everything that matters, Blackwell corrected. Money means nothing if it's not used for something meaningful. You've shown me that. This foundation is my legacy, Maya. Not the buildings I built or the deals I closed, but the lives we've changed together. I want to make sure it continues long after I'm gone. And there's one more thing. He pulled out a legal document. I want you to become co-director of the foundation with me. Equal authority, equal responsibility. This has always been as much yours as mine. It's time we made that official. Maya took the document with shaking hands. She'd come so far from that night in the restaurant when she'd been just a waitress trying to survive. Now she was being offered leadership of an organization that was changing lives, given resources and trust, and a platform to make a real difference in the world. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for believing in me, for giving me this chance. Blackwell smiled. Thank you for saving my life. Not just that night in the restaurant, but every day since. You saved me from becoming the man I was terrified of being. You gave me a second chance when I didn't even know I needed. 6 months after Harrison Blackwell walked away from his corporate empire, the Second Chance Foundation had transformed from an ambitious startup into a thriving organization that was reshaping how communities thought about healthcare access and crisis intervention. The permanent endowment had provided security and allowed them to expand in ways Maya had only dreamed about. They'd opened 2 satellite offices in underserved neighborhoods, hired a staff of 30, including case managers, financial counselors, and medical advocates, and were helping an average of 60 families per week. But more importantly, they were building something sustainable, something that would outlast any individual donor or corporate sponsor. Maya had grown into her role as co-director with a confidence that sometimes surprised her. She'd finished her degree in social work through an accelerated program, attending classes at night while running the foundation during the day. Her capstone project had been a comprehensive study of barriers to healthcare access, drawing on the hundreds of cases they'd handled at the foundation. The paper had been so well received that she'd been invited to present at a national conference on healthcare policy, where her lived experience and practical insights had resonated with academics and policymakers alike. She was no longer just the brave waitress from the viral video. She was becoming a voice for systemic change, someone who could speak both from personal experience and with data-driven authority. Harrison Blackwell had thrown himself into the foundation's work with the same intensity he'd once brought to corporate deals, but tempered now with wisdom and genuine compassion. He'd become the foundation's most effective fundraiser, using his business connections and his own story of transformation to inspire other wealthy individuals to support the cause. But more than that, he'd become a mentor to the young people they employed, including Tyler Morrison, who's now a full-time employee, having completed his community service and proven himself invaluable to the organization. Blackwell would sit with Tyler for hours, teaching him about financial management, strategic planning, and how to turn personal pain into purpose. Their relationship had evolved into something like grandfather and grandson, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to the work. Maya's mother, Sarah, had become one of the foundation's most powerful advocates, with her diabetes now well managed thanks to consistent treatment and Dr. Reeves's excellent care. She'd regained much of her vitality and strength. She volunteered at the foundation 3 days a week, greeting visitors and sharing her own story with families who were facing similar struggles. There was something profoundly healing for her in transforming her years of suffering into a source of hope for others. She'd tell people about the dark days when she'd thought there was no way forward, and then about the night Maya had faced down a gunman and set in motion a chain of events that had saved not just her life but hundreds of others. "Your daughter is a hero," people would tell her. Sarah would smile and say, "She's always been my hero. Now the world just finally sees what I've always known." Marcus, Maya's younger brother, had changed his major from business to social work, inspired by his sister's example. He was spending his summer internship at the foundation, working alongside Tyler on the youth prevention program they'd developed. The program visited high schools and community centers, teaching young people about healthcare rights, financial literacy, and how to access resources before crises develop. They'd already reached over 2,000 students, and the feedback had been overwhelmingly positive. Teachers reported that students were asking smarter questions about their family, healthcare situations, and connecting their loved ones with resources they hadn't known existed. It was exactly the kind of upstream intervention that could prevent future Tylers from reaching such desperate breaking points. The foundation had also begun documenting success stories in ways that were changing the broader conversation about healthcare access. They'd partnered with a documentary filmmaker to create a series of short films about the families they'd helped, humanizing statistics and policy debates with real faces and real stories. There was Michael, the construction worker who'd fallen from scaffolding. With the foundation's help, he'd completed his rehabilitation, retrained for a less physically demanding career, and was now working as a safety inspector, using his experience to prevent others from suffering similar injuries. There was Aisha, the single mother whose son had cystic fibrosis. Her child was thriving on the medication the foundation had helped secure, and she'd become a passionate advocate for insurance reform, testifying before state legislative committees about the arbitrary cruelty of coverage denials. And there was Patricia Morrison, Tyler's mother, whose transformation was perhaps the most dramatic of all. No longer tethered to an oxygen tank, she'd found work as a receptionist at a doctor's office and had become one of the foundation's most generous donors. Despite her modest income, she gave $25 every month, a sum that was significant for her budget, but that represented something more important than the amount. It was her way of paying forward the grace she'd been shown, of ensuring that other families wouldn't have to face the impossible choice that had nearly destroyed her son. She'd told Maya once, with tears in her eyes, "You gave me back my son and my life. I'll spend the rest of my days making sure other mothers don't have to feel what I felt." The impact of the foundation extended beyond individual families to influence policy and institutional practices. Several major hospital systems had reformed their charity care policies after seeing the foundation's data on how many patients were being crushed by medical debt. Insurance companies, facing public pressure generated by the foundation's advocacy work, had begun streamlining their appeals processes and approving more treatments on first submission. The state legislature had passed a Medical Debt Protection Act that limited the circumstances under which healthcare providers could pursue aggressive collection actions. The changes were incremental, far from perfect, but they represented real progress toward a system that treated healthcare as a right rather than a commodity. One afternoon, Maya received a call that brought her story full circle. It was Philippe Marchand, the manager of the Belmont Grand. "Miss Chun," he said in his precise French accent, "I hope you remember me." "Of course," Maya said, wondering what could prompt this call after all these months. "Mr. Marchand, how can I help you?" He explained that the restaurant wanted to honor the anniversary of that transformative night by hosting a fundraising gala for the Second Chance Foundation. "We've never forgotten what you did," he said, "how you faced danger with such courage, how you saw humanity where others saw only threat. The Belmont Grand would be honored to support your work." The event would feature a silent auction, remarks from Harrison Blackwell, and a special recognition for Maya herself. "I don't need recognition," Maya protested. "This work isn't about me." "Perhaps not," Mr. Marchand said gently, "but your story inspires people. It reminds them that one person's courage can change everything. Please allow us to celebrate that." The gala was held on a crisp autumn evening, exactly 1 year after the night that had changed so many lives. The Belmont Grand had been transformed, decorated with elegant simplicity, and photos from the foundation's work displayed throughout the dining room. Over 200 guests attended, including many of the families the foundation had helped, staff members, donors, and community leaders. Tyler Morrison stood near the entrance in a suit Maya had helped him select. No longer the frightened boy with a gun, but a confident young man with purpose and direction. He greeted guests warmly, sharing his story with anyone who asked. No longer ashamed of his past, but using it as testimony to the power of second chances. Harrison Blackwell took the podium looking healthier than Maya had seen him in months. His face had color, his eyes were bright, and when he smiled, it reached all the way to his soul. "A year ago tonight," he began, I sat in this restaurant as a man who had everything and understood nothing. I was wealthy beyond measure and utterly impoverished in the ways that matter. I saw people as obstacles or opportunities, never as human beings with their own struggles and dreams. He paused, his gaze finding Maya in the crowd. And then a young woman stepped between me and danger, not because she had any reason to protect me, not because I'd ever given her a moment's thought or consideration, but because she saw humanity where I had been blind to it. She saved my life that night, but more importantly, she showed me how to live it. He spoke about the foundation's work, the families they'd helped, the systems they were beginning to change. He announced that evening's fundraising total over $300,000 raised through ticket sales and auction proceeds, all of which would go directly to supporting families in crisis. And then he called Maya to the stage. Maya Chun, he said, is the heart and soul of this foundation. She's the reason we exist and the reason we succeed. Everything good that has come from that terrible night can be traced back to her courage, her compassion, and her unwavering belief that every human being deserves dignity and a fighting chance. Maya joined him on stage, uncomfortable with the attention but understanding its purpose. She looked out at the crowd and saw so many faces she recognized. Families they'd helped, staff members who'd become like family, her mother and brother beaming with pride, Tyler standing tall and redeemed. She saw Gerald Hawthorne in the back of the room, having purchased a table despite their history, perhaps experiencing his own moral awakening. "Thank you all for being here," Maya said, her voice strong and clear. "A year ago I was a waitress living paycheck to paycheck, terrified about my mother's health and convinced that the world was divided into people who had power and people who suffered under it. I've learned since then that the division isn't that simple. We all have power. The power to see each other, to help each other, to choose compassion over indifference. What happened in this room a year ago wasn't about me being brave. It was about recognizing that we're all connected, that someone else's crisis could just as easily be our own, and that we have a moral obligation to care for." She gestured to Blackwell standing beside her. "Mr. Blackwell and I come from completely different worlds. Under normal circumstances, we never would have crossed paths in any meaningful way. But crisis has a way of stripping away all the superficial differences and revealing our common humanity. This foundation exists because we both learned that lesson. Him from a position of power, choosing to use it differently, me from a position of powerlessness, discovering I had more agency than I knew. The work continues," Maya said. "We've helped hundreds of families, but thousands more need our support. We've influenced policy, but the system still fails to. We've created a model that works, but it needs to be replicated in every community across this country." She looked directly into the crowd, making eye contact with as many people as possible. "Everyone in this room has a role to play. Donate if you can, volunteer if you're able, advocate for policy changes, and most importantly, see each other. Really see the people around you. The woman checking out your groceries might be one medical emergency away from losing everything. The man serving your coffee might be choosing between rent and his child's medication. We're all so much more fragile than we pretend to be, and we're all so much stronger when we support each other." The applause that followed was thunderous, and Maya felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at this room full of people who had chosen to care, who had decided that other people's suffering mattered enough to do something about it. This was what transformation looked like. Not just her own or Blackwell's, but collective transformation, a community deciding to be better. After the gala ended and most of the guests had departed, a small group remained in the Belmont Grand. Maya, Harrison Blackwell, Tyler Morrison, Sarah Chun, Marcus, Rebecca, and the core foundation staff gathered around the same table where Blackwell had been sitting that fateful night. They shared stories and laughter, marveling at how much had changed in just 1 year. Tyler was preparing to start college in the spring, having earned a full scholarship to study social work. His mother, Patricia, had joined them earlier but had gone home to rest, still careful about her health but thriving in ways that had seemed impossible a year ago. Marcus was already planning next year's expansion of the youth prevention program, full of ideas and energy. Jennifer, Marcus Thompson, and Dr. Kim were discussing new partnerships with rural healthcare providers to extend the foundation's reach beyond the city. As the conversation flowed, Maya found herself watching Harrison Blackwell. He was laughing at something Rebecca had said, his entire demeanor relaxed and open. This was a man who had shed the armor of corporate ruthlessness and discovered that vulnerability and connection were strengths, not weaknesses. He caught her looking and raised his glass in a silent toast. She returned the gesture, both of them acknowledging without words the journey they'd traveled together. From strangers separated by class and circumstance to partners united by purpose, from a moment of crisis to a movement of compassion. Sarah reached over and squeezed Maya's hand. "Your father would be so proud of you," she said softly. "I wish he could have seen the woman you've become." Maya's father had been gone for over a decade, but she felt his presence in moments like this. He'd been a good man who'd worked with his hands and treated everyone with dignity, regardless of their station in life. He would have loved this work, would have understood its importance. As midnight approached, people began to leave. Hugs were exchanged, promises were made to gather again soon, and gradually the restaurant emptied until only Maya and Blackwell remained. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both processing the evening and the year that had preceded. "Do you ever think about that night?" Blackwell asked. "About how differently it could have gone?" "Every day," Maya admitted. "I think about how I almost didn't step forward, how fear almost won, how close we came to tragedy." She looked at him. "Do you ever regret the choices you made after? Giving up your company, the money, The power? Not for a second, Blackwell said without hesitation. I spent 40 years accumulating things that meant nothing and ignoring things that meant everything. These past months, doing this work with you, helping people, actually making a difference. This is the first time in my life I've felt like I was living with purpose instead of just existing with possession. If I could go back and talk to the man I was a year ago, I'd tell him that everything he thought mattered was the only thing that's real is what we do for each other. They were interrupted by Philippe Marchand approaching their table. I hope you don't mind, he said, but there's someone at the door who'd like to speak with you. She says it's urgent. Maya and Blackwell exchanged glances and stood up. At the entrance stood a young woman, perhaps 25, with a baby in her arms and desperation written across her face. She looked like she'd been crying for hours, and her hands trembled as she clutched her child. I'm sorry to bother you so late, the woman said, her voice breaking. I saw the news about the gala, about your foundation. I didn't know where else to go. My daughter, she has a heart defect. She needs surgery. I lost my job, lost my insurance. The hospital says they can't schedule the surgery without payment up front. I've tried everything. I've sold everything I own. I'm about to be evicted. I don't know what to do. Maya stepped forward immediately, her professional instincts taking over even as her heart broke for this desperate mother. What's your name? She asked gently. Christina, the woman said. Christina Rodriguez. And this is Sophia. She's 6 months old. Maya looked at the baby, so small and innocent, depending entirely on adults to save her life. She saw herself in Christina, saw her mother, saw Tyler, saw every person who'd ever been pushed to the edge by a system that valued profit over human life. She saw the endless cycle of crises that the foundation existed to interrupt. Come with me, Maya said, guiding Christina to a chair. We're going to help you. That's what we do. As she sat down with Christina and began asking the questions that would help her build a case file, she felt Blackwell's hand on her shoulder. A gesture of support and partnership. They would help this woman. They would save this baby. And tomorrow there would be someone else. Another crisis. Another family in need. The work would never be done, not completely, but that wasn't a burden, it was a calling. Harrison Blackwell excused himself to call Dayar Kiem, knowing she would want to be consulted on a pediatric cardiac case. As he stepped away, he reflected on the miracle of his transformation. He'd been given wealth and power from birth, had spent decades wielding both without conscience, and had very nearly died without ever truly living. But grace had come in the form of a young waitress who'd seen past his privilege to his potential, who'd demanded more from him than he'd thought he could give, who'd shown him that redemption wasn't about grand gestures, but about showing up every day to do the work of caring for others. Tyler Morrison, who had stayed to help clean up, appeared beside Maya with a folder and a pen. I figured you'd need these, he said with a knowing smile. She took them gratefully. Tyler had come so far from the terrified boy with a gun. He'd found his purpose in helping others avoid the desperation that had nearly destroyed him. His transformation was a testament to what second chances could achieve when they were genuine and supported. As Maya began documenting Christina's story, filling out the intake forms that had become second nature to her, she thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. One night, one choice to step forward instead of running away, one moment of courage that had rippled out in ways she never could have imagined. She'd saved Harrison Blackwell's life that night in a literal sense, but he'd saved hers too. He'd given her the opportunity to transform her own suffering into purpose, her own struggles into strength that could help others. The story of what happened at the Belmont Grand had become something larger than any of them. It had become a parable about the power of compassion, about the importance of seeing each other's humanity even in moments of crisis. It had inspired thousands of people to donate, to volunteer, to advocate for change. But more than that, it had demonstrated a fundamental truth that society often forgot. We are not isolated individuals competing for scarce resources. We are a community, interdependent and interconnected, and our fates are bound together whether we acknowledge it or not. As Maya worked with Christina Rodriguez, offering reassurance and practical help, she understood that this was her life's work now, not just running a foundation, but bearing witness to human suffering and responding with radical compassion. Every person who walked through their doors carried a story, a struggle, a spark of dignity that deserved to be honored. Her job was to see them, to help them, to remind them that they mattered. Hours later, as dawn began to break over the city, Maya finally left the Belmont Grand. Christina and baby. Sophia had been set up with emergency housing for the night and had an appointment with Dr. Kim in the morning. The paperwork for Sophia's surgery was already in motion. Another crisis intercepted. Another family given hope. Maya stood on the sidewalk watching the sunrise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, exhausted and frightened, serving coffee to people who barely saw her. She thought about how one moment of courage had changed everything. Not just for her, but for hundreds of people she'd never have reached otherwise. Courage wasn't about being fearless, she'd learned. It was about feeling the fear and choosing love anyway. Choosing to see other people's humanity even when it would be easier to look away. Choosing to act even when the odds were overwhelming. Harrison Blackwell had learned that same lesson from a different starting point. that wealth and power meant nothing if they weren't used in service of something larger than oneself, that true success was measured not in dollars accumulated but in lives touched, in suffering alleviated, in hope restored. Together they'd built something that would outlast both of them. The Second Chance Foundation would continue long after they were gone, helping people who hadn't even been born yet. But more than that, they demonstrated a model for how transformation happens, not through grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements, but through the daily choice to care about people whose society had written off, through the persistent belief that everyone deserves dignity and a fighting chance. The story that had begun with a gunman and a waitress in an upscale restaurant had become a story about the redemptive power of compassion, about the possibility of change at any age, about the ripple effects of courage. It was a story about a young woman who'd stepped between danger and a stranger because she saw a scared kid instead of a threat, about a billionaire who'd walked away from everything he'd spent his life building because he'd finally learned what mattered, about a desperate young man who'd been given a second chance and had used it to help others find theirs. It was a story about all of them, and about the truth that we are all one crisis away from needing help, one choice away from becoming our better selves. Maya pulled out her phone and called her mother. "Hey Mom," she said when Sarah answered. "I know it's early, but I wanted to tell you something. I love you, and thank you for teaching me that surviving isn't the same as living. I'm finally living." On the other end of the line, Sarah Chun cried happy tears and told her daughter what she'd always known. "You were always meant for extraordinary things, Maya. I'm just glad the world finally caught up to what I've always seen in you." As Maya walked to her car, she thought about all the people she'd help today, tomorrow, next week, next year. She thought about Tyler starting college and Harrison finding peace and her mother thriving and Marcus following in her footsteps. She thought about Christina Rodriguez and baby Sophia getting the surgery that would save her life. She thought about all the people she hadn't met yet who would walk through the foundation doors carrying burdens too heavy for one person to bear alone. And she smiled because she knew now what she hadn't known a year ago. One person's courage could spark a revolution of compassion. One choice to see instead of look away could change everything. The work would never be done, but that was okay. Some fights were worth spending a lifetime fighting. Some causes were worth everything you had to give. And some moments, terrifying as they were, defined who you were meant to become. The story of the young waitress who faced a gunman without fear, and the millionaire who watched in shock and never forgot wasn't really a story about one night. It was a story about every day after, about the choice to keep showing up, keep caring, keep believing that human beings deserve better than a world that measured worth in dollar signs. It was a story that would continue, written in the lives they touched and the hope they restored and the second chances they made possible. And somewhere in that city, as the sun rose on a new day, someone was facing a crisis that felt insurmountable. Someone was making an impossible choice. Someone was losing hope. But because of what had begun that night at the Belmont Grand, there was now a place they could turn. A foundation built on the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. A community committed to seeing each other's humanity. A reminder that courage and compassion could change the world, one person at a time. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power we all have to make a difference in each other's lives, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like and subscribe to see more stories that celebrate the extraordinary courage of ordinary people. And most importantly, look around you. See the people in your own community who are struggling. Ask yourself what you can do to help, because we're all connected, and the person you help today might be the one who helps someone else tomorrow. That's how change happens. That's how we build a world worth living. One act of courage, one moment of compassion, one choice to see instead of look away. Thank you for watching, and remember, everyone deserves a second chance.